Hey out there, and welcome to today's SEJ webinar. Very excited to have you here. I am joined with the team from Claravine. With me, I have Chris Comstock, Chief Growth Officer, and Andy Rice, Director of Demand Generation. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. Really excited to jump in.
Same. So for those of you who are new to Search Engine Journal webinars, my name is Heather. I'm going to be your moderator today. And today we are going to be talking about a survey that Claravine put together on the state of marketing data standards, especially as we're talking about AI so much lately. So very excited for them to get into the results and the tactics that they have for you all. But first, let me do some quick housekeeping, and then I'm going to turn it over. So if you have any cool learnings that you want to share on social, you can use hashtag SEJ webinars. There is also closed captioning, so it's a little CC in the top right of your screen. You can give that a click. And then if you do experience any technical difficulties, please use the chat box to let us know. We are going to take some questions at the end of the presentation, so you can use the chat or the Q&A tab to submit your question. We'll be gathering those during the presentation. If you see any questions that you like, you can give it a little thumbs up, and that'll tell us that it's important to you, and we'll try to front load those as well. You can see there's a handout under the Handouts tab, but we'll make sure that any resources are in your follow-up email that you'll get later today. And after the webinar, we ask if you can stick around, take a short survey. It takes about 30 seconds, and it just lets us know how today's webinar went for you. And lastly, again, with those resources, you're going to get the slides, the recording from today. So watch your inbox for that. And I think that's enough for me. So I'm going to get out of here. So Chris and Andy, it's all yours.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. I think first things first, let's just make sure that we're introducing ourselves here. Chris, why don't you go first here?
Yeah, so Chris Comstock, Chief Growth Officer at Claravine. Really kind of been focused on first-party data, product solutions, lead marketing, and our growth efforts with partnerships here at Claravine. So excited to share some of the findings from our recent research study.
Yeah, awesome. And my name is Andy Rice. I'm the Director of Demand Gen here at Claravine. I've been doing demand gen, lead gen, analytics, marketing type stuff for 13 plus years now. It's my bread and butter. And yeah, I learned a lot during the survey and since I've been here, and I think there's some really exciting stuff to talk through. So without further ado, we'll just jump in here. First off, what are we going to cover? What are we going to talk about while we're here? First off, we're going to talk about who we are, and importantly, what are data standards. I want to make sure we're going to be talking a lot about data standards on this call. So I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page about what we mean when we talk about that. We're going to talk about the current state of data standards, basically the results from our 2023 advertiser survey, and some of the key findings that we had there. After that, we're going to do deeper dives on some of the big things that are happening in the industry right now. There's privacy laws, AI, and those are having pretty big impacts on data standards. So we'll do a bit of a deeper dive on those. And then we'll wrap it up with some tactics that you guys can use to get started on improving your data across the board. So real quick, I think that's one of the most important things we can do up front is to define what we mean when we're talking about data standards. And here, I'll pass this over to you, Chris.
So we talk a lot about data standards here at Claravine. I always like to think about, things like phone numbers and, address. When you're looking to, find someone or find a location, you never think twice about understanding what the data looks like, what it means, and really, how to use it and leverage it. The same can't necessarily be said in marketing. We have lots of teams using different things. There's different link structures, different technologies that have different data requirements. And so when we think about data standards from a marketing standpoint, it's everything from how you standardize things like naming conventions, metadata, the link structures, all the things you're doing to set up drive customer experiences. We kind of included a quote that one of the participants in the study included, and referred to it as a playbook that helped keep their teams and keep their data in good shape. So we thought this was kind of a great encapsulation of what data standards meant to them.
Yeah, I think something that helped me understand what data standards really are is this sort of visual, which is, you've got a ton of different teams across, any sort of marketing engine at a company. You might have people who focus on email, who focus on social media, focus on content. And, every person is building metadata all the time, right? And you can see maybe they use different naming conventions. Maybe some people have the year, some people don't, some people have the channel, some people don't. And oftentimes different teams do have data standards in their own data where they say, okay, every time we send an email, we're going to have the year, the channel, the product, things like that. But that's probably not it may not be universal across all of the teams, which in the end makes it really hard to kind of aggregate the data together, do analysis quickly, things like that. So, if somebody has data standards implemented, it might look something more like this, where everybody, they might not need the same fields, but they're all working from the same fundamental playbook as to this is the language that we use. These are the campaign names. This is how we do our campaign naming. We put the year here, this is how the format is. All of those things kind of, make it so that data can be combined together and used better, if that makes sense. Did I miss anything on that, Chris?
No, I mean, this is what everyone hopes to have their data look like after they invest in and embark on putting a data standard strategy in place, which we'll talk a little bit more about.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so I think that we're going to roll right into our first poll. So yeah, our question for you, the audience: do you currently have a data standard strategy in place? We'll give you guys a couple of minutes but a little bit of time to fill that out.
And that should pop up for most people. If not, you can find that poll under the polls tab. If you give it just 1 minute, there we go. Okay, Chris and Andy. So we finally got some of the results coming in. So it looks like we have about 45% of people saying no, 30% saying yes, but looking to improve it. And you got 15% saying yes and 15% saying no, but working on it. So the majority of your people are in yes, but looking to improve, and no.
All right. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It doesn't surprise me. I think that this is something that's on a lot of people's minds, but it can be hard to sort of get going on it, so to speak. So, this is something, and I'll just move this along. This is something that we focus on. It's our bread and butter. We work on this day in and day out, and that's one of the reasons why we wanted to run this survey, is to understand kind of where the market was, and what was happening. How do people feel about their own data standards? How are they running their data? So I think without further ado, I think we can probably get into the survey. What do you think?
Sounds good.
Let's do it. Okay, so the 2023 Data Strategy Survey or study, basically at a high level, what we did is we interviewed, along with advertiser perceptions, 140 advertisers in the in the space. Chris, did you want to talk a little bit more about how we were sort of targeting?
Yes, I mean, we wanted to get a breakdown of, focused on, spending more than $50 million in media. So some of the larger brands and larger companies investing in, marketing, really wanted to span everything, not just advertisers, but, the media agencies, because if you're spending that much money in media, you're often working with the media agency. So really a kind of a full picture of the state. And really for us, we talk a lot, about the data standards, and we kind of live and breathe it. But, when we talk to customers and folks in the market at, conferences, not everyone's always like, do I need to do this now, or can it wait till later? So we really wanted to quantify and get a pulse on the market, because we hadn't seen a study that really captured some of the areas that we're going to talk about. So it was great to see, both from a validation and, as well as some surprising findings of really where people are at in this kind of target marketing user base.
Yeah, and I think it's worth calling out as well that most of the interviews we conducted, they're with companies who are spending over 50 million on their advertising. So these 140 interviews were largely with, large companies who've really put a lot of time and energy into this. And so if that's sounds like you, this is what peers are doing. If you're a smaller business, then this is probably some insight into what the people sort of at the tippy top of the market are trying to get done. So yeah, let's start with some of the key takeaways. First off, yeah, our data standards essential. Chris, how did you feel about the results in total about like the value of data standards?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously feel they're super important. So it was great to see that, everyone is starting to, I'd say get to that point with everything. We'll talk a lot about what's happening within the market from a privacy standpoint, but even just understanding that they are essential and it's not this something to think about after the fact, but it's becoming something to think about, as part of any digital transformation or ongoing changes that are happening from a marketing measurement perspective. It was great to also see not just that do people think it's important, they believe that if they don't focus on it and make it important, they might lose market share to their competitors who, if they make it important, it becomes a competitive advantage for their competitors.
Yeah. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about like the actual, the reason why that's the case, the value that comes from this sort of thing. So let's talk a little bit about the challenges. What are some of the biggest challenges that people are having with their data sets as they currently stand?
Yeah, so when we talk about data sets as part of the kind of some of the questions that we're asked to get to this data, it's really about, you've got things like financial data, budgeting from a marketing standpoint. You've got your media performance, so what campaigns, what audience information, what creative. Usually, even for us, for a smaller marketing team, we're advertising and pushing out things on social across many different platforms, trying to understand what's working and what's not working. And you have your user level behavior engagement, where you're trying to connect those campaigns to where people engage with your website and other areas. Different data sets, different naming, different IDs, ultimately to get to a state of a dashboard or measurement to understand and what's working and what's not working, to be able to make optimization decisions. And oftentimes at the bigger companies, teams may not have access to all the same systems. And so trying to share that information, they may be getting the data in the dashboard, but they may not have direct access or even know who's running the campaigns if they're working with many different media agencies or partners.
Yeah, sort of speaks to that the siloed nature of it, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. This next one, this on a personal level, this kind of blew my mind when I first saw it, which is, we asked what percent of the time is the wrong ad creative being served to the wrong customer, and the advertisers themselves put it at about 25% of the time. Agencies thought it was higher at 30% of the time. Kind of mind-boggling, like are people just okay with a quarter, a full quarter of their budget going to the wrong place? I don't know. Did you find that surprising?
I mean, I did. I also think that there's so much going on and so many people kind of in the mix and trying to create personalized experiences. I don't think by any means it's intentional. I just think everyone's moving so fast to try and get to the next campaign, to get things live, to look at what's working. Just one or two missteps along the way, again, unintentional, or not being able to know exactly what was the intended audience, what was the right message. And for some customers, it's not the end of the world if the wrong creative shows up in the wrong audience, but ideally you'd like to have that almost 0% to maximize every opportunity you have. So it was surprising, but from what we see and how data gets managed across some of these organizations, I think it can happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it also, kind of starts to indicate where maybe some value is available to be had from improving on the data side. Right on. In terms of demonstrating campaign ROI, it seems like ROI is getting harder. Is that kind of the right takeaway here?
Yeah, I mean, the law, again, I keep mentioning, we talk about privacy, we talk about AI. There's a lot happening. The aggregated data sources and the loss of signal right now is making it even harder to understand what's working and what's not working, which, as we think about standards and understanding the inputs to those aggregate, whether we'll talk about clean rooms and other tactics and tools that marketing teams are starting to adopt. It's really hard to understand what's working if you're not aligned and preparing and coordinating experimentation and other things. I think historically many teams had log files and other data sources to use at the user level, so you could understand what exactly was happening. That's becoming harder and harder, over time. And I think is finally, as we look forward to maybe Google finally killing the third-party cookie, the last, hopefully the last timeline shift on that front. But it's really kind of, it's just becoming harder for marketers to piece all this stuff together and understand what's truly working and what's not working. And I think the one on the right, if people are worried about losing their jobs, I think that kind of highlights the importance of fixing this problem that may have existed for many years with in the marketing and ad tech space.
Yeah, and also I think maybe there, it's possible that people got really used to first party attribution, right? Like all those signals that a lot of them are starting to go away, and it's going to get a little bit harder to track. So without sometimes that one-to-one, it's like, can I show the ROI of my campaigns as well as I used to be able to? I think people are feeling a pinch on that. Oh, skipped one. Yeah. Let's talk about sharing data a little bit. I mean, this seems like a place, when people are passing along audience data or other data, that there's still a lot of kind of manual work going on. What do you sort of see as the best practices here?
Yeah, I think it's great to see the 41% of people kind of doing the best practice. I was at a SaaS company during GDPR, and so got to kind of see firsthand the rigor and the concern around privacy and everything else. And I do think it's something that, especially from a consumer brand standpoint, you have to make top of mind. You have to put the practices in place. I think it's even more important with all the new laws happening today. So it's great to see the 41%. I think it's also the easy button of Excel, and sharing things via Excel was the second most common. So not surprising, but also may not be an ideal way to share data. So I think there's progress to be made on the 41%, being higher.
What do you think is the biggest danger of using spreadsheets to share this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it's just the static nature of where data lives, how it gets passed around and gets emailed, and just the risk of it living in many different places instead of keeping it in one place. So I also think you're starting to see more cloud native platforms keep the data in their solutions, or minimize the number of places that it can go, so they can understand where their customer data actually is and who has access to it. So
yeah, makes a lot of sense. So let's talk a little bit about the status quo. I mean, I for me at least, coming in as a sort of a demand gen style marketer, most places that I've been have had some sort of, cleanup period where data is bullied, pushed around, kind of to get it into shape for analysis. It can take weeks. Is that common? Is that kind of your experience in this?
Yeah, I think that the 8 was still a higher number than I was expecting. I think there's an aspect of
And that's the number of people, right?
Yeah, the number of people to fix errors, and I think that's just back to the system access, who's using the different systems to understand maybe even where the issue was, resolving the issue, fixing it in your analytics system. There's a back and forth and a collaboration aspect to it. The 8 was still high, but fixing the errors any 2 to 3 days, probably good from an error perspective. We do see customers, in the weeks to months category of getting the quality of all of their analytics data in a state, which may not necessarily be error related, but we do see customers sharing that it does take them long before they trust the data to be able to leverage it for the business decisions they need to.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. What kind of errors are we talking about here, just to be clear?
I mean, the worst kind would be campaign configuration, where someone's being served the wrong creative. There's others around just naming convention that could, the dashboards or data pipelines that are set up to understand certain elements of a naming convention to build and populate the dashboard. So you're getting kind of an incomplete picture of the data. It may look right, but you may see things that are showing up incorrectly, which give an incomplete picture. So
yeah, makes sense. Awesome. I think that's the tail end of the key findings here. Which, yeah, I think a lot of really interesting takeaways. So yeah, I think let's jump into, we live in a world where lots of things are happening all the time, and a couple of the sort of big industry shifts right now are privacy and AI. So let's dive into kind of the impact of new privacy laws and what's what's reflected on the data side there.
yeah, so there's a lot of headlines here. Obviously this is something we think about and talk to our customers about, but you know, concept of clean rooms, data sharing, walled gardens isn't necessarily a new thing. It's becoming more common with retail media networks starting to kind of keep data, understanding what data is working and what's not working. The loss of things like IP address, it's not completely new, but when Chrome and their presence in the market from a market share perspective starts wanting to remove IP address, Apple removing mobile IDs, and when you have a CFO of a public company talking about it in their earnings call, you know that it's having a big impact on revenue, which that's kind of like for us, it's like, okay, this is really being impacted. It's not just a thing to put on the sign.
That's the Peloton right
Yeah.
there. Right? Yeah,
it's
I was talking publicly about it. Whew.
Yeah, it's having an impact when it's making its way into a Wall Street earnings call. So
yeah. So yeah, privacy is probably not surprising. I'm sure everybody on this call has had some sort of has seen some sort of impact from privacy laws starting way back with GDPR, and I mean they keep coming. I think there's a lot happening there. Yeah, so we've got in our survey. I mean, this is also from our survey, which is 91% of people agreed that data standards is a must for a privacy-centric world. We'll talk a little bit about why that's the case.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's with all of the even state laws, privacy laws being put in place, federal laws, GDPR, we mentioned the Apple changes for mobile. But I think there's always been it won't impact or it doesn't impact enough. I think what's finally happening is that I'd say even as an industry and a marketing organization have been focused on trusting if we saw someone do something, we know that it had to have worked. We saw someone click on something, we saw someone watch it and ad. Even if we didn't know who it was, we could see it at a user level. That is going away. And so when we think about that signal loss, it is forcing kind of that holdout market share of like Chrome users and other users where you can get that first level of engagement. That finally change is causing kind of everyone to look back and look at how kind of rethink and move away from kind of that observation model and attribution to almost kind of going back in time to just truly marketing measurement. If you're going to try and test some experimentation, you may not actually know who actually did something, but if you test a certain message to a specific audience and a certain market and you see revenue increase, that's going to have to be good enough in a sense that you're never ever going to see enough users do it with that loss of signal. So I think the time is just finally forcing kind of that widespread revisiting historic behaviors and practices. So it's exciting. I think personally it's exciting to see, but it definitely there's a lot of change management and there's a lot of change that teams are having to deal with.
Do you think what kind of model do you think is going to be the most useful going forward for?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's ironic. B2B marketing has been dealing with this for a long time, where you never specifically know who's engaging with your audience, or you're putting content out there and you're understanding that it's indirectly influencing the buying process. I think that model and some of the challenges that B2B marketers have been dealing with is now just becoming the norm. That you're going to have to trust the things are doing and impacting revenue, which means you need a framework in place to understand what's working in what market, which just kind of changes the paradigm of not pushing everything downstream to your analytics team or your data science team to make sense of it at a user level.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So this is privacy is changing the data landscape. I think one of the big takeaways here is that the people who are implementing data standards are also the ones who are putting forward privacy sort of forward practices. Is that a fair takeaway?
Yeah, and I mean, if we think about generally what a clean room is, I think we as an industry love acronyms. We love new technology to implement that new technology. But I think clean rooms are, they mitigate a lot of the risk of the sharing, sharing users and emails and uploading things to different systems. But for audience targeting, they actually allow you to, in a privacy-friendly way, execute and get the benefits of that data sharing without actually having to share the data. So you're starting to see more and more, Google working with third-party clean room partners for matching and sharing, Snowflake as well. A lot of the data sharing happening within the walls of Snowflake. So it's great to see the progress there. So customer data doesn't need to be shared out and emailed around and living in many different systems and trusting those any number of third-party platforms. So
yeah. I think that makes sense for people who might not be, super familiar. Can you just kind of lay out what a data clean room is and how it works?
Yeah, I mean, so from a kind of, they're even starting to call themselves data collaboration platforms, but there's a, shared way of matching through some algorithms to understand, if you have a set of email addresses without actually sharing the email addresses and without being able to basically decode those email addresses, you're able to see what your overlap and what your match is. And so you can create audience segments that you can actually execute media campaigns on across the, whether it be an advertiser and a publisher or, just sharing data for a variety of different use cases. But again, without actually sharing the underlying, PII and customer data.
Awesome. I think that's very helpful. So I think it's time for our next poll, which is, for our audience here, are you currently using data clean rooms to do sort of this privacy-centric audience segmentation?
So while those start coming in, I think that was a great explanation of clean rooms. So let's see. So that should pop up for people. If not, oh, there we go. So far, we have 100% of people saying no, they are not using them.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't find that super surprising. I think, and I'm going to show some of the results from our survey here on the next slide. Maybe I'll give it a couple more seconds to run through, but okay. So, and this is where I think that this is interesting and might be really useful for the folks on this call, is that, for enterprise advertisers, 66% had starting to use data clean rooms. Maybe you could talk a little bit about this one, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more from the scale of the data and the brand risk to their customer data and kind of the first party impact. Again, for those enterprise customers, they're kind of more likely to adopt and have to collaborate with external media agency partners. It's becoming more top of mind. So, again, wasn't super surprising. But again, I think one thing to watch out for is that the clean room's not a silver bullet. It's not for everyone, and that's okay. But it is for those large enterprises who have, large first party data assets, that is their differentiating thing in market. And so the clean rooms are a tool and a tactic in many of the tools they use to, do customer acquisition and reach their customers.
Do you think it's something that's going to become like more common sort of down market as well over time? I feel like
it's a good question. I don't know. I think there will be aspects of it that maybe work their way into platforms like a Google customer match, where you're uploading email addresses, where you're targeting in LinkedIn. I think it's very possible. I don't know if there's a need in down market to actually own a clean room, but I think there will be aspects of the capabilities that could be leveraged.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. All right. I think let's move on to AI, which is, yeah, I mean, a topic du jour right now, for sure. Let's jump right in.
Yeah. So, is thinking back through this, it feels like AI has been around for 5 or 10 years at this point. But looking back, it was November 30th of last year. So we aren't even on 1 year from the time ChatGPT kind of first came out, and there's been so much kind of innovation. A few other, Adobe coming out with Adobe Firefly, integrating in AI for creative, generative AI for creative assets. Amazon just recently talked about, bringing AI powered image generation to advertisers in the workflow. When you see platforms like Meta releasing, open sourcing some of their AI, LLM capabilities, making it easy, other platforms building on top of some of the open source technology, the amount of innovation that's happening and streamlining capability, especially for teams. Again, we're using it ourselves for some of the image generation. Bottlenecks that used to exist for small teams are, providing easy access for many different tools to create, accelerate content creation, execution, etc.
Yeah, it completely blows my mind that that Chat GPT really didn't get prominence until less than a year ago, considering how like much of the sort of technology industry conversation is being dominated by AI right now. It's like this is still super new, but it's become so prevalent so fast. I don't know. I think one of the biggest things that I think of, especially if we're talking about data, is sort of scalability. AI can lead to, it makes it a lot easier to generate a lot more content faster. Is that, would you agree with that? Is that kind of what you see as one of the bigger data issues?
Yeah, I mean, content, ad copy. It's a sidekick that you can use and leverage to do much more, faster.
Yeah. And I think that brings us to our last poll here, which is, for our audience, are you using AI tools in some form today? And we'll give you a little bit to answer some of that. I think it's really interesting. While we're sort of going through this poll, I've looked at a lot of AI tools, since I'm in marketing. I'm always kind of on the lookout for things that make my job easier. But what I really noticed is, in addition to like the AI tools that are very, that heard of, ChatGPT or Midjourney or things like that, that it's also something that a lot of businesses are starting to incorporate into their products. I know Canva rolled out a big AI push. There's AI generated advertisements. I just think that there's a lot of ways that companies out there are starting to incorporate it into products that already kind of existed and that were already in use. And that's been some of the really interesting use cases that I've seen. I don't know if you've seen any particular AI use cases that jump out at you, Chris.
No, I mean, I think it's everywhere. It's in every workflow. I think, again, the amount of innovation in the last 12 months, I think it's really, it's kind of unprecedented. The amount that's changed and the amount that, even some of the large software applications, like, again, Adobe coming out with Firefly was great to see. And that, obviously it was many years in the making, but just the amount of releases and the pace of innovation is great to see in all the platforms.
What are the results that we're looking at here, Heather?
So you've got about 72% of people saying that they've experimented with it. You got about a quarter saying yes, they're widely using it. So about a quarter of the people on the call today, but we have one person saying that they're not going to touch it with a 10-foot pole.
I knew there had to be one. Right on. So yeah, this is something that we asked in our survey as well. And this is sort of how the enterprise folks are shaking out. Chris, if you wanted to talk through this.
Yeah, so I think on the 10-foot pole comment, we are seeing some, the financial services, pharma and life sciences customers that are, kind of putting a little bit of a pause on what can be done because of the highly regulated industries. And so that's, we are seeing a little bit of mix, obviously, 2 and 5. I think that a lot of experimentation. What we have seen really though is that, if you think about it, we talked a lot about the content creation, how it can help teams do more. At least at the big enterprises, it does put a burden on some of the analytics teams. So more content, the operations team, before, I think even a couple years ago, it was creating enough content to do personalized experiences at scale is really hard. Now the pace that you can create those different assets and different ad formats is much simpler, and may even be done faster because you can do it yourself. But when it comes time to measuring that, making sure the campaigns are set up, tracked, named accordingly to enable that measurement, it's kind of shifting I don't say the burden, but the challenges down market in that kind of content supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you add up some of those stats, right? So the circle chart here is the confidence in the ability to properly tag and track the assets created by AI. You would hope when you're tracking assets that most people would be pretty confident about their ability to track those assets. It's a concrete thing that you can label. But what's 78% of people are not very confident in their ability to track. Only 22% of people are very confident in their ability to track it. That seems like a glaring hole to me, a sort of a point of concern, especially if a lot of folks are starting to use it or at least considering using it soon. Any other takeaways on the AI side that you want to make sure that people walk away with, Chris?
No, I mean, I think we'll kind of touch on some of them when we get into the, how do you put this in practice? But I think I think experimentation is great. I think there's a lot of, it's an exciting time. I mean, I think it's worth experimenting and trying out in any capacity, even, I mean, Chat GPT or Bard or the others. It's almost like a great sidekick. I mentioned that, but like just searching, asking for ideas, what things are doing, just to get a kind of starting point. I think on content writing, it's like great, like just to get some ideas and ask questions. So
right on. All right, so let's talk about getting started here in terms of what are some best practices. So we've got folks who might be new on the call or trying to advance. So yeah, I'll let you take it from here, I think, as the resident expert on data standards maturity.
So we think about kind of four areas when we talk to customers. So that emerging, everyone's been tracking marketing campaigns, tracking all the way back to even the basic of tracking codes, if you will. But understanding, for this kind of the larger customers that have bigger marketing teams, they're spending money in paid media. Understanding kind of the basic foundations of just what's working within a given team, may not have clarity, may not have company-wide dashboards. That's kind of the basic piece. And then you move up into more of the foundational, where there's maybe a couple teams aligning, or a business unit that may be a little more forward thinking, where they're doing basic measurement on campaign results, sharing information, sharing dashboards, and optimizing on channel specific data. Kind of moving up further into the advanced area, where you're starting to see more of an executive sponsorship alignment across many teams, where there's taxonomies in place, proper naming conventions that are aligned across teams, where the decisions that are made on uniform analytics. When we think about that, if you go into the various analytics systems, which are often your web analytics system, maybe you have a mobile app, which usually have different data sets, your dashboards, your data lakes, you start to have a little more fragmentation, if you will. And then really kind of those leading, mature, kind of forward-thinking companies are really getting into, again, we talk about that measurement, are already thinking about, optimization, algorithms. Things are fully automated. They have process in place to move fast through that, from content creation to measurement, and decisions are being made from a planning and financial perspective using that performance data. So that's kind of that leading edge, where there's all things are connected together, and teams are really working in unison. So we'll jump into what can you all do, and some basics. And so I think, and again, we this will be speaking also from a just our even marketing team. Of it doesn't always have to be the enterprise. There's some of these things are applicable to any team working in these different channels, working in different systems. We have a number of technology SaaS solutions that we use on the marketing team. So it's just understanding kind of where are you at. There's often we have even spreadsheets that exist for different data sets and different audiences and creative, and sharing with some of partners we work with. Just understanding where you're at. Where do you have issues? Where do you maybe have inconsistencies because you had a team that named something a year ago, and now you want to make a change to how things are named. To be able to compare data from a year ago, you need to be able to have it aligned with how the new naming conventions and taxonomy are in place. So I think just understanding the state of where your team, where your company is super important. This is a big one that I talk about a lot. Don't wait for perfection. I see a lot of teams kind of wanting to get everything buttoned up right away, which then kind of broadens the scope, expands the scope of the project, and more people get involved, more teams. And then 6 months go by and you really haven't implemented anything and you haven't been able to see the benefits of some of the changes. And so I'd say don't wait for that perfection. It's easy to work with one team, one channel, one system very easily and condense that into, maybe even using the benefits from that one team as a case study to get more teams on board. And then the third one, and again, something we talk about a lot, collaboration. We're a small marketing team, but we have a few different partners we work with externally to support our marketing team. And working with them, collaborating, asking what they're doing, I think, working with other partners and agencies that have a unique perspective because they work across many clients. Talk to your SaaS partners, see what they're doing, see what they're hearing in the market. I think that collaboration, across any teams, other team members, if you're at a bigger company, can be hugely valuable to kind of get to a great data standards strategy and putting it in place. So those are three kind of areas that we always recommend people use to get started.
Right on. So I mean, this is bringing us close to the end here. So I figured I'd just wrap up a little bit with some of the sort of things that stood out to me after we, did this survey and understanding the data. One is that data standards are essential to keeping pace with the industry, especially with all of the changes happening. That advertisers right now are struggling to align the right content to the right audience, and that they oftentimes write it off just kind of as the cost of doing business. It's like, oh, that's just, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been in a place where it's like, well, we just assume that this is just, not everything can get where we want it to go and we'll never know. And that's okay. That's just the way things have to be. And honestly, that's not actually the case. I think that there's solutions out there that can help. Advertisers aren't super confident in their ability to tie campaign performance to specific data or assets right now. I think, there's a ton of opportunity and people are worried that their jobs are on the line, which, isn't surprising with the privacy changes in the industry. And then, it sort of ties into the next bullet, which is that companies just, haven't been evolving fast enough to keep up with a lot of these changes. But there are a few folks who are sort of forward thinking and have been making progress on it. The last little bit I'll leave you with is that we did ask how much ROI folks thought that they could get from having better data standards. And 30% was the average that, we could probably get a 30% increase to their ROI. So it's almost like a magic 30% increase to their budget, the results, which is amazing. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity there to, if data standards are implemented, if people get their analytics in order, there's a lot of possibilities in terms of what you can get for your budgets going forward. Did you have any last thoughts that you wanted to share, Chris?
No, I think there's some good questions, which I think will be good to get answered. So,
yeah. All right, then I think it's time to jump into the Q&A.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to close this slide since we have Andy here with us, and we didn't have you on the slide, Andy. I don't know why.
Right. So I know who the brain power is, on this team for sure.
All right. Well, before we get too far into it, I'm curious on that last slide, that 30% estimate increase in ROI. How is that ROI measured?
Yeah, so I can speak to some of what our customers share. It can be everything from productivity and time to produce content to market. So it's, not sharing spreadsheets, not working across different systems. If people are aligned as it gets handed off from different teams to create that content and bring it to market. There's also time to data being used in market. And so if it takes a team, let's say a month to clean up the reporting data, that gives you 12 chances a year to optimize against that data. If you can cut that in half, you're doubling the number of opportunities. And so I think their ROI can come in return on ad spend, it can come in revenue. There's a number of different ways depending on the customer So I mean, it was great to see the 30% as a number. We always say it. It's great to always have someone, a third party, validate what so it's not just us saying. It's like, oh no, people are doing it. We do find that some customers haven't fully quantified it from a revenue perspective, because sometimes it is really hard to quantify the true impact of kind of a before and after state. They definitely, like, yes, things are much better, but they don't take the time to stop and quantify it other than they know things are better. So
Oh, that's great. So, okay, sorry, let me grab my questions over here. So, you did bring up a great point because you said that sometimes it can be hard to quantify, right? And so when you are talking to leadership, and you touched on this a little bit, but when you are talking to leadership and you're talking about bringing tools in to help you do this and workflows, like how do you show the ROI to leadership? How do you get budget and buy-in to do this type of makeover?
yeah, I mean, I think having one team or one kind of proof point is always super helpful. So if you have a team that's maybe more willing to try something different, to go through that change management process, maybe a new product, new innovation, or an area that's smaller, not may not have a big media budget. I think that always helps. Uh, I do think it's important for the customers we've seen be super successful. There is executive level buy-in and understanding. I do think it's fascinating that everyone understands A/B testing on a landing page because it's free and there's really no cost to it other than the software, because it's your own site. You see less willingness because of the media dollars in place to do experimentation on media, because what happens if it doesn't work? And so I think there's a cultural shift from a team perspective that's important to have as you go on this journey, because it's not a try it once and stop. It's an ongoing kind of behavior change that you need to kind of embrace as a larger team. And so I think when you have that and you have the buy-in, I think the privacy stuff's forcing more of the executive sponsorship and becoming more of a top order thing that just has to happen, which is great to see. Before, that wasn't necessarily the case 3 or 4 years ago. So I think that's kind of organically happening as well.
Great. And so, as you talk about privacy, we had a question from Jonathan. How should we mitigate potential data privacy risks when it comes to AI use?
I'm guessing maybe that's more around the creative tools being used. I think I would say understanding where it's being used. I think there's some pockets of, I think I was surprised in the 2 and 5 where we saw it in the bigger companies. I think there may be pockets of teams that are using it that isn't being used enterprise wide yet. So I think understanding where it's being used. I also think understanding I don't think it's a bad thing that it's being used. I think actually it's understanding how it compares. If you're using generative AI to create assets, are they performing better or not than others? I don't think, just even looking at that, understand the inputs, what you can learn from that, both from, for your creative teams and creative agencies. More testing, more experimentation, I think are great. But just generally from a privacy standpoint, understanding where it's working, who's using it, are the ads being created, are they brand safe, are they on brand? I think that's the biggest maybe risk on the creative side specifically.
So, as we're talking about ad creative, Mark asked regarding ad creative being served to the wrong customers. So, early in the presentation, wondering if there's a study on how much of that is due to the constant shifts in search algorithms.
We didn't, Andy, maybe you have some thoughts here, but we didn't touch in our study on the change in search specifically. I think it's more for us when, the agency respondents in the study, obviously they're much more on the, I think programmatic side as it related to what they're doing, creating programmatic media campaigns, but not as much on search specifically.
Yeah, difficult to know in that sense. Yeah, how much?
Yeah.
Is being...
Okay, so let's see. How do you convince people or teams who really don't understand the details about data to take on this type of initiative?
I think it probably depends on the who in that question, but I think it's oftentimes if it's someone that's responsible for the business and they're not getting the metrics and the data they need, And if they can see the improvement to get that faster, they can then put that data to use, that kind of time to use metric. We've had some customers that tell us it takes multiple months to report on the previous whatever that time period is to get the data. And so, if it's a business owner or someone who's responsible for making optimization decisions, obviously the longer it takes, the less time in market, especially if there's a market event happening that they want to capitalize on, you got to be able to move fast. So that's usually what I've seen where there's the data that matters to somebody to use and it helps them do their job better. That usually is a convincing argument to get, some sort of change management in place.
So sometimes I wonder if there's a conversation that needs to be had about kind of how the sausage gets made when it comes to data and analytics sometimes. I think, sometimes what gets up to somebody in the leadership space is like, oh, this is a report that says what worked. And they're like, oh, they look at it, it's great. They don't ask questions like, how long did it take to get this report? How much data cleanup needed to go into this? How confident are we in that this data is actually accurate? And I think that it's just a black box that a lot of people maybe are a little too comfortable not opening. And I think there's probably some opportunity there too, if I had to guess.
I think it's a great point. We're in the middle of doing like QBRs, right? And so this is very, very top of mind for us right now. And it's something that I talk with my team about constantly. Like, if it takes too long, let's talk about a different way to do it. So I think that's a great point, Andy. So I think we got time for one or two more questions. So we got a question here from Adam. What would be some suggested AI or tools that you can recommend for a single person team who handles all of the data and analytics?
I'll let Andy, you answer this one since
no.
we're a small team and we've experimented with some of this stuff. And so, yeah.
Most of my experimentation on AI has been more on the creative side. I think that there's, I don't know if there's an AI solution, for someone specifically, for a single person team who's focusing on data. I don't know. Is there something that comes to mind for you, Chris? Like I said, I think I've mostly been focused on the creative side when it comes to AI.
Yeah, I think on the data and analytics side, I've even recently some of the Google Analytics capabilities where there's business questions that are being asked that you can click on, and so I think it's interesting some of the LLM. I know Snowflake and a lot of those things being able to ask business questions related to analytics, data, and outcomes. I think being able to search through the data and analytics and surface those things very quickly, I think can provide some, even starting points of where to start looking and digging into instead of having to look through a bunch of dashboards. So that's what comes to mind for me outside of the content creation and creative tools.
And I think we got one more question. So if we won't be able to do one-to-one attribution much longer, what is the best way to measure marketing performance?
I mean, Andy, do you want to? I'm happy to.
Yeah, I mean, I think you probably can give some good insight into this, but I think there's a few ways. I think people might need to get a little bit, and you kind of alluded to this, Chris, and you tell me if you think I'm going off base, but I think people might need to get a little bit more comfortable with a little bit more ambiguity, not in terms of, understanding these are the things that ran at this time, and then these are the results that came in at that time. And, you may not have the ability to directly attribute like this specific ad came in, this person filled out a form, and this person that, they went on to go be, I think that's been sort of the dream scenario for a lot of marketers right now, is the ability to, add to content download, to MQL, to opportunity, and so on. And that might get kind of severed in places. And so the ability to kind of do cohorts and, understand, okay, these are the ads that we were running at this time that pointed to what content, this is the content that was being downloaded around that time, and then tying that to, okay, so these are the leads that came in. From there on, once it gets into sort of the first party data system, then it's a lot easier to do attribution from there. So just being able to tie the activities to, once it gets into sort of your first party data, using time and cohorts, I think is something that makes a lot of sense. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, and I'd say just comfortable experimenting, right? But understanding what the hypothesis is. And if you've defined a hypothesis, it's like, even if maybe pick on Amazon, you can go target certain types of shoppers in Amazon. And just because that's maybe a preconceived notion about that. But if you put a message in front of them and you pick a different audience on Facebook and you see how they perform, and there may never be any engagement. I think we've all been so trained on that observation of like, it must have only worked because someone clicked on something. And that's going away. Like, it's just a matter of time. And so just being able to understand, okay, here was the message. I tried this audience. What was the relationship between those? And did a certain product or certain piece of revenue or business line, did it increase shortly thereafter? And if it did, you can have that correlation. So I think it's just getting comfortable back to that kind of ambiguity and trust. But to do that, you actually have to be more organized and kind of more have a hypothesis of what you're testing and make sure that there's not kind of overlap and influence across those test segments. So
It's a great point. Marketers always be testing. Marketing 101, right?
Back to basics. It's almost like we had 20 years of innovation and we're kind of going back to some of the basics. It's kind of exciting.
I would agree with that. Okay, gentlemen, well, we've hit all of our questions and we're just about out of time. So I want to thank you all very much for, all the information and insights that you shared and bringing this data to our SEJ readers. Before I let you go, any last words and let the people know where to find you?
Yep. Thanks for joining. It's been a pleasure. And yeah, I mean, we're happy to, if anyone has any questions, wants to dig in, or you can kind of reach out on LinkedIn and find us. So yeah, don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, you can always come through, or clarivine.com. I got ways to contact us there. And I do want to, before we break here, the handout that's included here is the full survey report. So all the data that we talked about, as well as a bunch of other stuff, is available there. Feel free to download it, take a look at it, and yeah, happy to answer any questions. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
Awesome. Yeah, and thanks for mentioning that handout. It'll also be included in the resources when you all get your slides in and recording later today. So thanks for the questions. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for the chat. And yeah, we'll see everybody on the next webinar. Have a good day. Bye all.
All right. Bye.